think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
Hello, welcome to Chaos Shamanism. I am the Clairsentient Psychonaut. As I mentioned in the last episode, I had satisfied my curiosity over Christianity and atheism. I found both of them lacking in sense philosophically and coming up short as far as evidence in my own experience was concerned. I was, however, still very interested in the massive glut of subjects, practices, and experiences forced semantically under the definitions occult and mystical, things which attracted so many but also angered and terrified so many more in our culture. Now, the first book I ever read about the occult was Mysteries by Colin Wilson. I chose it completely randomly, not based on any review or advice from others. And in hindsight, I gotta say, out of all the books I could have randomly picked up off the shelf, I was extremely fortunate to have chosen this one, as I am much more aware now of how much fluff, misdirection, and self-help feel-goodery is out there, crowding the shelves of every metaphysical section in every bookstore. This book was, perhaps, the best general introduction I could have found regarding what I was curious about concerning the occult and paranormal. I remember spending hours sitting by the pool at my apartment complex, completely engrossed by this book. I had already read some books and seen some TV shows about the paranormal throughout my life, but they were the shallow equivalents of Time Life book series and sensationalist TV shows and dubious documentaries. Mysteries offered the most comprehensive and intelligently researched source on the subject I had yet found, approaching each subject with a healthy skepticism tempered by an open mind. The knowledge from the book, which had the strongest and most immediate effect on me, was a section where he breaks down dowsing. You've all probably heard of dowsing with a rod, usually a Y-shaped stick, in order to locate underground water or even objects, which is also known as water witching. You hold one branch of the double-sided end in each hand and walk around with it until you feel the rod begin to tug downward and pull to a certain place in the ground. On a side note, I've since experimented with a dowsing rod and have had positive results every time, but it was dowsing with a pendulum that struck me at this early time in my life. Wilson instructs the reader to create their own pendulum by tying a string to any weighted object and then to dangle the object over various things, and the pendulum will begin to rotate on its own. I decided to take him up on the challenge. I cut a rubber band so it became a rubber string and fastened it to a AA battery with electrical tape. The book claimed that if you hold the pendulum over your right hand, it will rotate counterclockwise, and if you hold it over your left hand, it will rotate clockwise. I held my self-made pendulum over my right hand and, to my astonishment, watched it slowly rock back and forth before gaining enough momentum to start rotating counterclockwise, just as Wilson mentioned. I then held it over my left hand and watched it rotate clockwise. This was the first time in my life that anything I had read about in any sort of spiritual religious source had been borne out immediately in my personal experience. This wasn't anything like a prayer request, or asking Jesus into your heart, or even an assertion that God does not exist. Something actually happened.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
12th of March, 1922, San Francisco Chronicle. Mysterious rocks falling slowly in Chico, California. Meteorites do not fall slowly, and there's no other suggestion that these were meteorites. 16th March, San Francisco Call. A deluge of the rocks falling on a crowd of curiosity seekers. 15th March, San Francisco Examiner. Professor Stanley of Chico Teachers College is quoted, "Some of the rocks are so large that they could not be thrown by any ordinary means." 21st March, 1922, Boston Transcript. A snow reported in the Alps, nothing odd about that, but this snow was accompanied by a fall, or an appearance of a fall, of caterpillars and huge ants, along with the snow. 29th of May, 1922, London Daily Express. An object, thought to be a craft or machine of some kind, fell into the ocean off Barmouth, Wales. Many witnesses. Unexplained because no airplanes were reported lost at the time. Some of the witnesses also said this damned thing fell slowly, in violation of Galileo, like those damned rocks in Chico. 5th September, London Daily News. Little toads reported falling for 2 days at Chalon-sur-Saône, France. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but whatever. 12th of May, 1906, London Daily Mail. At Furnace Mill, Lambhurst, Kent, England, a man named J.C. Playfair went to his stable to feed his horses. He found surrealism. All but one of the horses were turned around in their stables, and the one not turned around was totally missing from its stable. Mr. Playfair looked here and there for the horse, and then became a surrealist himself. He looked in the hay room, even though the door was too small for the horse. He found the horse there. I imagine they looked at each other with a wild surmise. The story says that Mr. Playfair had to knock the wall down to get the horse out of the hay room. Space-time transients and unusual events. Persinger and Lafreniere. Page 81. 1790. Sudden pitch blackness at noon in New England area. Associated green lights reported. End of the world panic. 1819. Massachusetts area. Another sudden darkness in the daytime, with falls of normal rain and particles of matter. 1839. Brussels. Another sudden darkness, with falls of ice. 1904. Memphis, Tennessee. Sudden daytime darkness lasting 15 minutes. 8th of December, 1931. New York Times. On the steamship Brechet, a deckhand was seen by the captain and other crew members to suddenly display a 4-inch-long bloody gash on his forehead. The appearance was as if he had been struck by an invisible weapon or an invisible assailant, and he fell unconscious. No projectile was found in the wound.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out of you.
Alright, now I should address the skeptics' apparent debunking of pendulum and rod dowsing. They claim that the rod moves or the pendulum rotates because your subconscious mind is activating muscular movements in your arm so small that you are not even conscious that they are going on. In essence, that an aspect of your very own mind is taking control of your body in a way that, quote-unquote, you are not aware of, and then proceeding to lie to you, making you believe, for some reason, that the rod or pendulum is moving on its own. Now, I have to say, in my own experience, I have a very hard time believing that the ridiculously striking degree of movement I would experience from the pendulum could possibly be due to teeny tiny muscle movements so small that, try as I might, I could not perceive them at all. Now, after messing around with pendulum dowsing quite a bit myself, I decided to read more of how the skeptics had supposedly debunked the whole thing. I read in a book claiming to disprove the paranormal about an experiment that was done where a farmer who claimed to be able to find underground sources of water with a dowsing rod was tested by scientists who denied from the start that any such thing was possible. They took the farmer to a field which he was unfamiliar with, in which the scientists had studied ahead of time so that they knew where there was water underground. After the farmer was able to successfully locate multiple underground sources of water with his rod, the scientists concluded that rod dowsing had been disproven. Their quote-unquote logic was that since it is impossible for someone to find water with a stick, the farmer must have been lying and was somehow intimately familiar with, ahead of time, exactly where every underground source of water was in this area. And he was clearly a liar. Okay. They also nitpicked that the movement of the rod was not completely on mark 100% of the time, and that any deviation, regardless of the final outcome, proved that dowsing is unscientific and therefore nonsense. Now, dowsers will be the first ones to admit that their rods and pendulums aren't correct all of the time, but that, in the end, the results speak for themselves. The most accomplished dowsers also claim to have their very own unique individual techniques and approaches, which they developed on their own over years and years of practice. Some dowsers get answers from the degrees of rotation they receive. Some find answers based on if the pendulum rotates clockwise, counterclockwise, rocks forward to back, or rocks left to right. Some even employ complex mathematical formula based on the pendulum's reaction to different lengths of string. The experts also stress that someone who is just beginning to experiment with dowsing is going to get a lot of negative results, and that it takes quite a bit of time to narrow in on your own personal form of divination. In defense of dowsing, I would also like to bring up the staggering number of very normal people, mostly farmers in the countryside for obvious reasons, who swear by it, yet scoff at things like ghosts and UFOs. In my experiments with it, I found that it was wrong about certain things, but also right about others. For instance, when I would take a series of objects, randomize them without looking, and then cover them with a sheet, the pendulum turned out to be wrong when I would ask it to identify the covered objects. However, in another instance, I asked it to rotate over objects which were drugs. I held it over a bottle of beer, and it rotated. I held it over a TV remote, and it did not rotate. I held it over a bag of marijuana, and it rotated. And then I held it over a bottle of hot sauce, thinking in my head that it certainly is not a drug, and was surprised to find that it rotated. I asked it again, and it still rotated. I thought about it a bit and remembered that capsaicin, the active hot chemical in peppers, is actually technically considered to be a drug, as it does have a very slight narcotic effect on a person. One could argue, of course, that my subconscious mind remembered that capsaicin is a drug, but by the same token, if my subconscious mind can do that, wouldn't also have remembered which objects under the sheet were which, as my own hands had rearranged them. I also found that experimenting with the pendulum would somehow leave me feeling tired and physically drained of energy. I also found that using it while tripping on psychedelics somehow made it react more intensely. It would be so strong at times that within seconds it was rotating so hard that it would spin completely horizontally like a helicopter rotor. I remember when I would first show friends my rotating pendulum, often holding it over their heads, they would marvel as the pendulum would rotate strongly over them and would ask, "What is it?" And I would answer, "It's dowsing." And they would ask, bewildered, "But how do you do it?" My only answer was always, "I don't know, but it happens." Now, I just wanted to add that another experience I had early on around this time involving something like dowsing. I was at a friend's house at a party, and I picked up a metal rod of some sort and felt it begin pulling me in different directions in the apartment. And so I let it go and let it take me where it wanted to take me. And it pulled me into my friend's bedroom and then into the closet and pointed right at a stuffed animal that was in there. Now, it's interesting because this story kind of stretches out over years and years. Years after this, when I had made contact with spirits, my spirit guide pulled me towards that object again. And when I asked about it, I was told that it basically carried a very negative energy or impression on it related to my friend, and that I should urge him to get rid of it at all costs. Now, when I confronted my friend about this, he nearly broke down in tears and admitted that that was a stuffed animal he had stolen from his estranged father, who left him at a young age, feeling that, well, at least I took this from him since he took my father away from me by leaving. And it was a huge breakthrough emotionally for him, and the next day he got rid of the thing immediately.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed. She went into an alternate dimension.
This is taken from opensciences.org, from an article called Manifesto for a Post-Materialist Science. All right, it starts out with 3 quotes. The first one is by Nikola Tesla. It says, "The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence." Second quote is from T. Folger, from an article called Quantum Schmontum, from Discover Magazine, issue 22, pages 37 to 43, from 2001. "Despite the unrivaled empirical success of quantum theory, the very suggestion that it may be literally true as a description of nature is still greeted with cynicism, incomprehension, and even anger." The third one is from Max Planck, theoretical physicist who originated quantum theory, which won him the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918. It says, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulating consciousness." A group of internationally recognized scientists have come together to stress the importance of what is still commonly overlooked in the mainstream scientific community: the fact that matter, protons, electrons, photons, anything that has a mass, is not the only reality. We wish to understand the nature of our reality, but how can we do so if we are continually examining only physical systems? What about the role of non-physical systems, such as consciousness, or their interaction with physical systems, or matter? Fortunately, some scientists are studying non-physical systems, and the double-slit experiment is a great example of this. A paper published by Dean Radin, PhD, in the peer-reviewed journal Physics Essays explains how this experiment has been used multiple times to explore the role of consciousness in shaping the nature of physical reality. Just to reiterate, at the turn of the 19th century, physicists started to explore the relationship between energy and the structure of matter. In doing so, the belief that a physical, Newtonian material universe was at the very heart of scientific knowing was dropped, and the realization that matter is nothing but an illusion replaced it. Scientists began to recognize that everything in the universe is made out of energy. This has been known in the scientific community for more than 100 years. We are talking about what is known as post-materialist science, and the points made below summarize the problem with not recognizing, acknowledging, and examining phenomena that go past the borders of the physical material world. These points were co-authored by Dr. Gary Schwartz, professor of psychology, medicine, neurology, psychiatry, and surgery at the University of Arizona, Mario Beauregard, PhD from the University of Arizona, and Lisa Miller, PhD from Columbia University. It was presented at an international summit on post-materialist science, spirituality, and society. The manifesto reads as follows. "We are a group of internationally known scientists from a variety of scientific fields, biology, neuroscience, psychology, medicine, psychiatry, who participated in an international summit on post-materialist science, spirituality, and society. The summit was co-organized by Gary E. Schwartz, PhD, and Mario Beauregard, PhD, from the University of Arizona, and Lisa Miller, PhD, from Columbia University. This summit was held at Canyon Ranch in Tucson, Arizona on February 7th through 9th, 2014. Our purpose was to discuss the impact of the materialist ideology on science and the emergence of a post-materialist paradigm for science, spirituality, and society. We have come to the following conclusions. 1. The modern scientific worldview is predominantly predicated on assumptions that are closely associated with classical physics. Materialism, the idea that matter is the only reality, is one of these assumptions. A related assumption is reductionism, the notion that complex things can be understood by reducing them to the interactions of their parts or to simpler or more fundamental things such as tiny material particles. 2. During the 19th century, these assumptions narrowed, turned into dogmas, and coalesced into an ideological belief system that came to be known as scientific materialism. This belief system implies that the mind is nothing but the physical activity of the brain, and that our thoughts cannot have any effect upon our brains and bodies, our actions in the physical world. 3. The ideology of scientific materialism became dominant in academia during the 20th century, so dominant that a majority of scientists started to believe that it was based on established empirical evidence and represented the only rational view of the world. 4. Scientific methods based on materialistic philosophy have been highly successful in not only increasing our understanding of nature, but also in bringing greater control and freedom through advances in technology. 5. However, the nearly absolute dominance of materialism in the academic world has seriously constricted the sciences and hampered the development of the scientific study of mind and spirituality. Faith in this ideology, as an exclusive explanatory framework for reality, has compelled scientists to neglect the subjective dimension of human experience. This has led to a severely distorted and impoverished understanding of ourselves and our place in nature. 6. Science is first and foremost a non-dogmatic, open-minded method of acquiring knowledge about nature through the observation, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of phenomena. Its methodology is not synonymous with materialism and should not be committed to any particular beliefs, dogmas, or ideologies. 7. At the end of the 19th century, physicists discovered empirical phenomena that could not be explained by classical physics. This led to the development during the 1920s and early 1930s of a revolutionary new branch of physics called quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics has questioned the material foundations of the world by showing that atoms and subatomic particles are not really solid objects. They do not exist with certainty at definite spatial locations and definite times. Most importantly, quantum mechanics explicitly introduced the mind to its basic conceptual structure, since it was found that particles being observed and the observer, the physicist and the method used for observation, are linked. According to one interpretation of quantum mechanics, this phenomenon implies that the consciousness of the observer is vital to the existence of the physical events being observed, and that mental events can affect the physical world. The results of recent experiments support this interpretation. These results suggest that the physical world is no longer the primary or sole component of reality, and that it cannot be fully understood without making reference to the mind. 8. Psychological studies have shown that conscious mental activity can causally influence behavior, and that the explanatory and predictive value of agentic factors, for example, beliefs, goals, desires, and expectations, is very high. Moreover, research in psychoneuroimmunology indicates that our thoughts and emotions can markedly affect the activity of the physiological systems, for example, immune, endocrine, cardiovascular, connected to the brain. In other respects, neuroimaging studies of emotional self-regulation, psychotherapy, and the placebo effect demonstrate that mental events significantly influence the activity of the brain. 9. Studies of the so-called psi phenomena indicate that we can sometimes receive meaningful information without the use of ordinary senses and in ways that transcend the habitual space and time constraints. Furthermore, psi research demonstrates that we can mentally influence, at a distance, physical devices and living organisms, including other human beings. Psi research also shows that distant minds may behave in ways that are non-locally correlated, i.e., the correlations between distant minds are hypothesized to be unmediated. They are not linked to any known energetic signal, unmitigated, they do not degrade with increasing distance, and immediate. They appear to be simultaneous. These events are so common that they cannot be viewed as anomalous nor as exceptions to natural laws, but as indications of the need for a broader explanatory framework that cannot be predicted exclusively on materialism. 10. Conscious mental activity can be experienced in clinical death during a cardiac arrest. This is what has been called a near-death experience. Some near-death experiencers have reported veridical out-of-body perceptions, in other words, perceptions that can be proven to coincide with reality, that occurred during cardiac arrest. Near-death experiencers also report profound spiritual experiences during near-death experiences triggered by cardiac arrest. It is noteworthy that the electrical activity of the brain ceases within a few seconds following a cardiac arrest. 11. Controlled laboratory experiments have documented that skilled research mediums, people who claim that they can communicate with the minds of people who have physically died, can sometimes obtain highly accurate information about deceased individuals. This further supports the conclusion that mind can exist separate from the brain. 12. Some materialistically inclined scientists and philosophers refuse to acknowledge these phenomena because they are not consistent with their exclusive conception of the world. Rejection of post-materialist investigation of nature or refusal to publish strong science findings supporting a post-materialist framework are antithetical to the true spirit of scientific inquiry, which is that empirical data must always be adequately dealt with. Data which do not fit favored theories and beliefs cannot be dismissed a priori. Such dismissal is the realm of ideology, not science. 13. It is important to realize that psi phenomena, near-death experiences and cardiac arrest, and replicable evidence from credible research mediums appear anomalous only when seen through the lens of materialism. 14. Moreover, materialist theories fail to elucidate how brain could generate the mind, and they are unable to account for the empirical evidence alluded to in this manifesto. This failure tells us that it is now time to free ourselves from the shackles and blinders of the old materialist ideology, to enlarge our concept of the natural world, and to embrace a post-materialist paradigm. 15. According to the post-materialist paradigm, A. Mind represents an aspect of reality as primordial as the physical world. Mind is fundamental in the universe. In other words, it cannot be derived from matter and reduced to anything more basic. B. There is a deep interconnectedness between mind and the physical world. C. Mind, or will/intention, can influence the state of the physical world and operate in a non-local or extended fashion. For example, it is not confined to specific points in space, such as brains and bodies, nor to specific points in time, such as the present. Since the mind may non-locally influence the physical world, the intentions, emotions, and desires of an experimenter may not be completely isolated from experimental outcomes, even in controlled and blinded experimental designs. D. Minds are apparently unbounded, and may unite in ways suggesting a unitary, one mind that includes all individual single minds. E. Near-death experiences and cardiac arrest suggests that the brain acts as a transceiver of mental activity. In other words, the mind can work through the brain, but is not produced by it. Near-death experiences occurring in cardiac arrest, coupled with evidence from research mediums, further suggest the survival of consciousness following bodily death and the existence of other levels of reality that are non-physical. F. Scientists should not be afraid to investigate spirituality and spiritual experiences, since they represent a central aspect of human existence. 16. Post-materialist science does not reject the empirical observations and great value of scientific achievements realized up until now. It seeks to expand the human capacity to better understand the wonders of nature and, in the process, rediscover the importance of mind and spirit as being part of the core fabric of the universe. Post-materialism is inclusive of matter, which is seen as a basic constituent of the universe. 17. The post-materialist paradigm has far-reaching implications. It fundamentally alters the vision we have of ourselves, giving us back our dignity and power as humans and as scientists. This paradigm fosters positive values such as compassion, respect, and peace. By emphasizing a deep connection between ourselves and nature at large, the post-materialist paradigm also promotes environmental awareness and the preservation of our biosphere. In addition, it is not new, but only forgotten for 400 years, that a lived, transmaterial understanding may be the cornerstone of health and wellness, as it has been held and preserved in ancient mind-body-spirit practices, religious traditions, and contemplative approaches. 18. The shift from materialist science to post-materialist science may be of vital importance to the evolution of the human civilization. It may even be more pivotal than the transition from geocentrism to heliocentrism. All right, it has a list of the manifesto's authors: Mario Beauregard, PhD, Neuroscience of Consciousness; Larry Dosey, MD, Internal Medicine; Lisa Jane Miller, PhD, Clinical Psychology; Alexander Moreira Almeida, MD, PhD, Psychiatry; Marilyn Schlitz, PhD, Social Anthropology; Gary Schwartz, PhD, Psychology, Neurology, Psychiatry, and Surgery; Rupert Sheldrake, PhD, Biochemistry, Developmental Biology, Consciousness Studies; Charles T. Tart, PhD, Transpersonal Psychology. And here it also has a list of over 200 scientists, philosophers, doctors, and thought leaders who agree with this manifesto. And I'm not going to read all of those because it's over 200 people. The EpochTimes.com. Astronomer says spiritual phenomena exist in other dimensions. By Tara MacIsaac. April 7th, 2014. Astronomer and mathematician Bernard Carr theorizes that many of the phenomena we experience but cannot explain within the physical laws of this dimension actually occur in other dimensions. Albert Einstein stated that there are at least 4 dimensions. The 4th dimension is time or space-time, since Einstein said space and time cannot be separated. In modern physics, theories about the existence of up to 11 dimensions and the possibility of more have gained traction. Carr, a professor of mathematics and astronomy at Queen Mary University of London, says our consciousness interacts with another dimension. Furthermore, the multi-dimensional universe he envisions has a hierarchical structure. We are at the lowest level dimension. The model resolves well-known philosophical problems concerning the relationship between matter and mind, elucidates the nature of time, and provides an ontological framework for the interpretation of phenomena such as apparitions, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and dreams, he wrote in a conference abstract. Carr reasons that our physical sensors only show us a three-dimensional universe, though there are actually at least four dimensions. What exists in the higher dimensions are entities we cannot touch with our physical sensors. He said that such entities must still have a type of space to exist in. Quote, the only non-physical entities in the universe of which we have any experience are mental ones, and the existence of paranormal phenomena suggests that mental entities have to exist in some sort of space, unquote, Carr wrote. The other dimensional space we enter in dreams overlaps with the space where memory exists. Carr says telepathy signals a communal mental space, and clairvoyance also contains a physical space. Quote, non-physical percepts have attributes of externality, he wrote in his book Mind, Matter, and Higher Dimensions. He builds on previous theories, including the Kaluza-Klein theory, which unifies the fundamental forces of gravitation and electromagnetism. The Kaluza-Klein theory also envisions a five-dimensional space. In M-theory, there are 11 dimensions. In superstring theory, there are 10. Carr understands this as a four-dimensional external space, meaning these are the four dimensions in Einstein's relativity theory, and a six- or seven-dimensional internal space, meaning these dimensions relate to psychic and other intangible phenomena.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
All right. In addition to Mysteries by Colin Wilson, I got to say another book that was hugely influential and important to me early on was Book of Lies, The Disinformation Guide to Magic and the Occult, which is a collection of writings compiled by Richard Metzger. It features the work of many people, including comic book scribe and chaos magician Grant Morrison, beat poet god William S. Burroughs, painter and performance artist Joe Coleman, the infamous Aleister Crowley, experimental architect Paul Lafley, Church of Satan founder Anton LaVey, legendary psychonaut Timothy Leary, mushroom priest Terence McKenna, journalist and founder of Reality Sandwich Daniel Pinchbeck, performer in Human Enigma Genesis Peorage, and agnostic pope Robert Anton Wilson, among others. Many of these writings further altered my perceptions and concepts of what was possible in reality. I remember one part of Grant Morrison's entry, Pop Magic, that set me forward on my spiritual path in a rather literal way. All right, I'm going to read that little section now. Relax, go for a walk, and interpret everything you see on the way as a message from the infinite to you. Watch for patterns in the flight of birds. Make oracular sentences from the letters on car number plates. Look at the way buildings move against the skyline. Pay attention to noises on the streets, graffiti sigils, voices cut into rapid, almost subliminal commands and pleas. Listen between the lines. Walk as far and for as long as you feel comfortable in this open state. The more aimless, the more you walk for the pleasure of pure experience, the further into magical consciousness you will be immersed. Magical consciousness resembles states of light meditation, hypnagogic pre-sleep trance, or alpha wave brain activity. I took his advice and went for a walk around my admittedly mundane apartment complex. What happened next was beyond anything I had ever experienced before in my entire life. I should note that I was completely sober. I wasn't tripping on acid, I wasn't high on marijuana, not a drop of alcohol, not even a sip of coffee. Yet I felt as if I was experiencing a psychedelic trip, only without the accompanying feeling of intoxication or uncomfortable edginess. As I gazed in wonder at everything around me, things I had seen countless times before, it was as if I was experiencing everything for the first time. Every view was like an amazing panorama, painstakingly framed by an expert photographer. The green of the grass popped out like glowing neon, and I was filled with a feeling of purpose and bliss which I simply could not put into words. I remember a nut falling from a tree and bopping me on the head. Normally this would have pissed me off, but I burst into laughter, feeling that the tree had just pulled off a brilliant feat of physical comedy at my expense. I felt suddenly assured that life really did have purpose, that the meaningless, material world of the atheist mindset was the true illusion, dragging so many into the abyss of pointless nihilism by trapping them in its heavy mind cage, making us all forget how big everything really is. I remember going back to my apartment in an ecstatic haze and trying to recount my experience to friends on social media to no avail. I could barely describe what I had experienced. How could I make anyone else understand with mere words? Ah, language. It frees us so much. It's what largely distinguishes us from animals. And yet, at the same time, it is a prison that writes the possibilities of our reality like a computer program. To everyone listening, I urge you to take the same walk, unless, of course, you live in a really bad part of town, In that case, crack open Google Earth, select a random place on the globe, zoom in and find a street, and take a virtual walk there yourself. Really. Now, I said in the last episode that in this one there would be something like a miracle that had happened, but that got pushed back. I got more into this subject than I thought I would, so that's going to be in the next episode. Alright, look forward to that one. Take care of yourselves out there.
Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears I can interact with it.
The fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing. I'm already too far gone to know what to do.